Abigail Gibbons here. We've had a brief hiatus in our weekly interviews, and I'm so excited to be back, ramping up our next series of interviews leading up to our next event, where we're going to be talking about mental wellness and how we're navigating the pandemic and burnout. Today, I'm here with none other than fantastic mental wellness and mental health advocate and cannabis and CBD writer, Alyna Paparazzi. So I'm so happy to have her here today, to have her share her story with us, and really to start to have the conversation around CBD and cannabis and how women can use it and break down those barriers and kind of stigmas when it comes to education around the industry. And most importantly, how it can help us navigate different periods and times where we're struggling mentally or physically, and how it can be an asset to us. So Alyna, please go ahead and introduce yourself. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here, Abigail. So as you said, I am a cannabis and CBD writer, as well as a mental health advocate, being somebody who does deal with mental health issues myself. I kind of came into the cannabis writing CBD space officially about a few months ago, going into October of 2020. I had done a project in the past that had already exposed me to this kind of an industry, but I really didn't get a head start into the writing portion of it until up a couple months ago. I had worked for a medical dispensary up until that point, located here in Florida. And so all of that together really just got me involved in the cannabis space and realizing the effects that the plant has for people with mental health conditions. I've written for a bunch of different blogs and online magazines, some specifically catered towards women in cannabis. So there's a lot of different ways that cannabis is being used today that I don't think most people in general, especially women, really know the benefits that CBD has, whether it is in flower form or whether that's just in topicals, concentrates, and things of that nature. So I really am impassioned to use my writing to sort of spread information about it, especially for people who don't understand the basics of it, which is really important.
Absolutely. And to clarify, I am one of those people who maybe understands the basics, but not really. It's one of those things where I'm all for it, but we've had different experiences or you hear different stories, and it just can kind of deter you from using it and being educated. So it'll be really great to have you here and kind of help share more about the industry and the products, and just really bring education to the topic. So thank you. And I also want to focus on one thing that you said, which is opening up a little, that you had your own mental health issues. I really want to bring that conversation to the table because we all have had our different mental health issues. I know I have, and that's particularly why this event is important to me. And especially with the pandemic, we are stuck at home, we're in lockdown, we're at home, and different issues or struggles that we may have that we've been able to work through because we've been busy with work. We've now had to navigate, or we've had to navigate different career challenges because some of us have lost our jobs and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to bringing all of those pieces to the table and conversation. And I'd love to hear more about, you said, of course, you kind of fell into the industry, you're working at a medical dispensary. But if you want to share more, I'd love to hear more about how you kind of fell into that role and what it was like learning about cannabis and kind of how you got educated, because so many of us are like me, where we're still entirely new. So I'd love to hear what that journey was like for you, like being introduced to the industry and working in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about it because there's so many different ways people kind of discover their way into it. But for me, my first experience with cannabis was kind of like everyone else's, not everyone else's, but for most people, you have friends, you're in college, you're done with classes, and you just want to take some edge off. And that was kind of where I experienced cannabis for the first time. It wasn't really something that I saw myself doing more often, just because again, there wasn't much discussion that really involved anything in terms of medicinal or recreational in that time. Things with the industry had progressed, but more so especially in Colorado. Florida at the time had not even done medical cannabis yet, so this was something that you still saw as just something that you did in college.
Yeah.
When I eventually graduated from university. I hadn't really done it up until that time. And then I went to work for a marketing agency, and one of my responsibilities was to do a report on the cannabis industry at that point. And so there was a lot of research that was involved, and it was about a 3 month project that I was responsible for. And apart from just talking about the industry, it talked about the struggles that they're facing and
Mhm.
also the representation in the industry. So there
Mhm.
was also a large focus on women and minorities in business, also the ability to get capital funding and
Mhm.
banking and finances and a lot of different aspects that I had no idea about until I did this report. And then the more I researched it, the more I realized, okay, this is something that really is going to be something even within the next year or two. There was already so much that had moved ahead. And I believe at that time, cannabis for Florida had just kind of popped its head, and
Mhm.
the amendment was able to get passed through for medical purposes. I didn't really have anything to do with it up until the point that I started working at the dispensary.
Mhm.
And you you learn a lot obviously about the benefits of the industry, but you also learn a lot of the sort of roadblocks, and also kind of just typical with any business, you see a lot of people in it that don't necessarily have the best interests when they're going into
Mhm.
it, because this was definitely an industry where um new money making opportunity was very prevalent. And
Yeah.
so you were getting certain businesses and people who ran different kinds of corporations getting into this space, but not all of them, some of them, but not all of them, were more focused on the monetary aspect than the
Mm.
medicinal aspect of things.
Mhm.
And you start to talk to a lot of different people, and I met most people through LinkedIn. LinkedIn was kind of where, honestly, cannabis is talked about the most, because for most other social platforms, with the acceptance or with the exception of maybe Instagram a little bit,
Mhm.
um, a lot of sites don't promote cannabis content because of the fact that it isn't a federally legalized drug or
Mhm.
medicine. And so a lot of the conversations are stuck to LinkedIn. And so when I was finally kind of deciding I wanted to get out of the dispensary because it wasn't what I anticipated it to be,
Mhm.
I met with a lot of different people on LinkedIn, and I started to ask myself, okay, well, if I don't want to do this hands on, what other way can I do it? And so my
Mhm.
degree in college was writing, and I'm a big writer. I always have been. And I realized that this was going to be a niche that was really, really important, not just for businesses and to promote their products, but just for informing people, because
Mhm.
you're kind of surprised at how much information not only is told in not the best way in terms of propaganda, and things like the war on drugs and dare, all those programs that talk
Mhm.
about it, and those sort of roadblocks in terms of legality for cannabis, they really push the propaganda to where cannabis research and studies were so minimal that there is a lot of misinformation, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of assumptions for people that not only use cannabis, but for people who, you know, are saying that it's a reputable business, because some people just look at it as, the stoners just want to be high all day. And that's
Mhm.
not really what it's about. And,
Yeah.
meeting a lot of people on LinkedIn and stuff, that really kind of opened my eyes to see that my writing, as well as the prior knowledge I already had, could be a really good helping point and a starting block for people who don't know about this and who
Mhm.
want to understand that it's more than just, smoking on your couch and just relaxing all day. There's other benefits to that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alyna. That's so important. And I really enjoy how you used your education and just working in the industry to really help others and become an informant and help share awareness, education for all of us who are curious about it. So you can kind of help fight that misinformation. because I've heard that before. And actually, Takesha Harvey, who's the founder of Canna Curious magazine, and she's the one who connected us, is after a similar mission with you, just in terms of she worked in the industry and then found how much misinformation there is, and also the discrepancy between different different groups and cultures here in the United States. And of course, when we're talking about minorities, how that is another barrier. But she helped us solve for that too. So I really love meeting more of these women like you, like Takesha, who are coming and hoping to stop spread the misinformation. So that way we can start to learn more about the benefits. So I know this interview is really focused on you and your challenge that you've had to overcome. So I'd be curious to hear, when we're talking about a challenge that you've had to overcome in your career, if learning more about cannabis and the CBD industry, if that's helped at all too in overcoming these challenges, whether it relates to mental wellness or whatever else it might be. So with that said, please take it away and answer our first question that we always ask everyone, of what is a challenge that you've had to overcome in your career and your personal life that you know others watching can relate to?
Absolutely. You know, I thought about this question a lot because there's a lot of different ways that I could have
Mm-hmm.
gone with this. Um, but really, what I wanted to talk about, and I think that doesn't get discussed as much, especially when it comes to business women in general, is
Yeah.
that whether it is cannabis or any kind of industry, I think the biggest problem, personally for me, that I had to overcome was toxic femininity in the workplace.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Let's get into it.
yeah,
Good answer.
because for me personally, growing up, my experience with women and even certain friendships, they weren't what most people kind of paint female relationships to be like. There's a lot of the fun loving, commenting on pictures,
Mhm.
going out and doing things, but there's not a huge discussion when it comes to women who aren't necessarily the type that like to get dressed up or like to put on makeup every day or do their hair. And personally, for me, I've always been a bit of a tomboy.
Mhm.
And as I grew up, I kind of grew out of that. And I like a lot more, quote unquote feminine things. I
Yeah.
like getting dressed up here and there and, putting on a face of makeup or whatever. But even early on, as a woman, you're really discriminated against by other women who see you in t-shirts or jeans and sweatpants, and they kind of look at you as either a frump, or they think that you're not enough of a woman,
Mm.
that you naturally are just somebody that's either messy or lazy, or you don't care about your appearance,
Mhm.
which is not the case. I In my younger life, I got called a lesbian by a couple of girls, which I'm not, but
Mhm.
just because of my appearance or how I acted or
Yeah.
however. And so, as much as we would like to say that women do support other women, in my
Mhm.
personal experience, I have had more animosity in a workplace trying to relate to the women that I worked with
Mhm.
as opposed to the men, which is something that I didn't really expect. And I've had, you know, like certain animosity and negative experiences with male coworkers as well,
Mhm.
but more so I've had to navigate how to deal with the more dressed up and primped up, looking beautiful all the time type of a
Mhm.
woman. And I don't have any sort of negative feelings towards women that choose to do that,
Mhm.
but my issue was that because I was not on that same sort of an appearance level, or I didn't
Yeah.
put as much time into that, it it took me out of, I'm not professional enough, or I'm not enough of a woman entrepreneur just because I'm not also wearing heels and
Mhm.
having my hair fixed every day. And there's a
Mhm.
level obviously of professionalism that comes with any job.
Of
And that's
course.
and that's different from having to always be dressed up. Most of the places I worked at were business casual. So I
Hmm.
would dress up nice, but I wouldn't, go over the top. And,
Yeah.
some women did, and that was fine. But, even when they don't say it, you feel the sense of, you're not trying hard enough to fit in with that dynamic of women in business.
Hmm.
And I think that that does a real disservice to girls who are like me, are much more down to earth and relaxed and laid back, to
Hmm.
where those things, they're necessary on a certain level, but my overall appearance has never been what is most important in terms of how I present myself and my business. I go off my work, and my
Hmm.
appearance will come second, but it's still not something that I would like to use to discriminate against other women in the workplace just because they're not showing dressed up every day.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have had no one get into that on our Wow series discussions yet, and it's so important. And I know absolutely that other women can relate to this and have been through the same experience as you. And I'm so happy that you brought it up. And, even I can relate to that too, in terms of, I mean, there's so many layers to what you were saying. Like, I was thinking of so many different experiences that I've had where I relate to that too. And I think as a part of that, it also goes to, I used to feel like I had to like check pieces of my personality and who I was at the door, because that wasn't like what the stereotypical like woman in the workplace was supposed to be. Or, I was told, like, Abby, why don't you wear heels to the office more? Like, isn't that how you get a boyfriend? Like, don't you need to wear heels more? I mean, that was from a male, not from a female. But then, we also get into kind of that competition among women as well, which isn't necessarily correct. Or like, oh, she's not dressing how all of the other women in the office dress, or she dresses a little differently, or she's a bit too casual, and how that can be used as against us in our careers. And it's just so ridiculous how you're you could do excellent work, but what's the culture that, given the company culture, like that's not necessarily being talked about. It's just being talked about like, oh, well, she's not matching what we're all wearing in the office, or she looks different. And that also is so relatable to when we're talking about not looking the part, whether it's because of our skin or how we dress or our hair or our background. That piece resonates with so many different aspects of issues that we have with different cultures and corporate cultures. And when we're talking about, why should our appearance matter so much if our work is representing of the quality that we do? And I like that you mentioned it too, because of course we have to present ourselves with professionalism, so like looking well kept and like being put together and all of that, but just recognizing that that varies for different individuals, and like you shouldn't have to check who you are at the door when you go to work every day, no matter what you're doing, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're working in a corporate setting.
Yeah, and I definitely felt that for me. I definitely was doing that and checking
Hmm.
certain parts of my personality at the door, because even growing up, I wasn't the girl that had a lot of girlfriends. I
Hmm.
mostly hung out with the boys and I played with the
Hmm.
boys. And it was just my personal preference because
Yeah.
I had had so many negative experiences trying to
Hmm.
be friends with girls. And, I don't necessarily look girly enough. And
Hmm.
then, at some point you grow up, and then for the guys, well, you're a girl. And,
Yeah.
they don't want to play with the girls anymore.
Yeah.
And so then, it's always been kind of this like back and forth. And then finally, figuring out how to be right in the middle of being able to have true, genuine female friends who don't always care about how I appear. And then
Hmm.
also realizing that, yes, my appearance is important and I do want to look the part and I do want people to respect me. But whether I choose to wear a skirt and heels, or if I just decide to, wear jeans and a nice pair of shoes and a great
Hmm.
blouse, I am no
Right.
less professional or
Yeah.
any less of a woman for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. And I like getting into that too, of just recognizing that like we can look different and have different styles, but that doesn't make us any less of a woman or who we identify with. You know what I mean? And I really appreciate that we're having this conversation too, because it is so important. And it also kind of reminds me too of I unfortunately, like probably most of us have had that experience with a female coworker, manager, or anyone like who we're working with who kind of also would rather compete with us than support us. And I
Mhm.
see that kind of coming into this conversation too when we're talking about like toxic femininity. It's also kind of that idea that I think there's so much conversation about like the white male and how they are not supporting or they're the root of all problem. But this conversation also reminds me that, you know, it can be anyone. Like we can even have that female employee who should be championing us, but who's not because, you know, they had to work harder to get to where they are. They don't want you to beat them or grow, you know, because it might impede on their success. I kind of see that being a part of the conversation too. And maybe some of us in the situation that you're referring to, like maybe because we look different or because we might just dress different, maybe that intimidates others or it's not the norm. Or but you know, there's so many pieces to this conversation about different types of toxic femininities or ideas or stereotypes that come at a societal level, like, oh, women can't support women because it's going to impede on your success, which isn't true. Or, you know, women need to dress this way in the workplace or else they're not going to be considered successful because they're not looking like these different expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just, in terms of when there even would be female bosses and,
Yeah.
um, other women in the office, they play a straight face and
Hmm.
then, they go off to the side and you're hearing all this stuff that they're talking about her.
Yes.
And,
That's the gossip and all of that. I know.
exactly. And it's just like, okay, I thought that we were kind of, all in this together. And,
Yeah.
there obviously, there are negative bosses and not so great leaders, whether they're male or female.
Yeah.
But just in terms of how the women would talk about the other women and how sometimes honestly too how entitled they felt to a particular position over the girl that the
Mhm.
got the position in the role,
Mhm.
they'll try to find issue with it even when there's not. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I do think too where we have talked about, how there is some oppression when it comes to females in the office. I think that unfortunately in that discussion also created a little too much entitlement where it feels like just because I'm a woman and I'm kind of doing the same things that she's doing, I should have that. But what they're not seeing is that this girl is also putting in overtime and
Mhm.
she comes in early every day. She'll stay late if she has to.
Yeah.
She gets along with all the other coworkers. She took the responsibility to learn other things. And
Mhm.
so there's things that we aren't seeing behind the screen that other people, whether it's a woman or a man or anyone, that they are doing. And so to kind of then, if they get a position, just because they're seeing the surface of what's going on in the 8 hour, 10-hour day, Monday through Friday, they feel as though it's not fair. But again, it's not just about being inclusive of women, it's also making sure that we all have the right qualifications for what we're doing. And I don't
Mhm.
want it to become this thing where people put women in positions just because they're a woman, or they put
Mhm.
certain minorities in this position just because they can. I want them to be there, but I
Mhm.
also want them to have that experience. I want them to have the leadership potential that certain positions need. And if you don't exactly match that, that doesn't mean that you're not good or that they're keeping you down. Maybe you do have to find something else. And part of
Yeah.
navigating where you fit in the workplace as a woman and the type of job you want to do is a really big part of also include being more inclusive of women, is
Mhm.
that women ourselves, we need to be able to understand that if it's not working, maybe it isn't just us, or maybe it's not just the company. Maybe we need to look at both sides and see,
Yeah.
maybe has our time passed here? Should we be moving on? Are we not allowing ourselves to move forward because maybe we're scared?
Yep.
And that's fine. But I also think that those are discussions that women should be having and, figuring out amongst each other.
Exactly. I love that too. And it's so much of that idea of self-reflection and how can we come together to overcome a problem. For example, we're not scaling in our careers like how we want to, rather than blaming it on culture, society, your managers, leadership. figuring out like, well, how else can I get there? And how can I use the women around me to help brainstorm and self-reflect and see where I can grow, all of that to reach our career goals. So that's so important. And on that note, do you have advice related to the challenge that you had to overcome or just in general for the next generation when we're talking about this?
Yeah. You know, being someone who's just now at 26 kind of really discovering what I want to do with my career, whether I do stick with cannabis or not, you know, I think one of the most important things that I learned from all of this is that just because there are other people in your spot that have gotten farther than you, that does not mean that you are by any means behind or that you're
Mhm.
not doing enough. Especially because I'm very introverted and how I approach the world and discussions and people, it's very different. And I'm just now learning. I've met a lot of great people through Instagram, a lot of female entrepreneurs who are introvert and actually teach introverted female entrepreneurs how to navigate the space. Part of learning to be successful in whatever career, whether you want to be an entrepreneur or not, is also being able to understand what your real personality is and what your
Yes.
limitations are, what your stressors are, and learning also to navigate your career that is also um, that also accepts you as the person that you are. I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time trying to fit in with a particular crowd of work people because
Mhm.
I thought if I did, I'll get ahead and I'll get
Yep.
promoted and I'll get the raise. But even when I was doing the same things that other people were doing, I was not getting the same outcome as they were. And
Mhm.
I was finding myself even falling behind or not doing as much anymore. And I was like, I don't understand what's happening. I'm putting in the work and I'm doing these things, but why am I so much more tired? Why am I so much more stressed and anxious
Mhm.
than they seem to be? And it was because I really wasn't doing things that were conducive to me and my limitations and my energy levels. I can only be in large groups of people for a certain amount of time and then I do
Right.
need to go home and recharge. You know,
Right.
I can I can sit and write articles and blogs all day long, but sometimes, one-on-one communication or public speaking is really challenging for me. And it's not
Mhm.
just because I'm shy or I'm quiet. It's also because how I process words, how I speak, it's very different from how an extroverted person is going to be in the workplace. And
Mhm.
there's so many articles that you see now that talk about how extroverts do so much better in this space and why introverts kind of feel like they're not getting anywhere. And kind of what I had to realize is that if I'm not building my career also around the fact that I do have certain advantages, but also disadvantages with my own personality, then no matter what I do, if I'm always feeling burnt out and stressed, clearly something that I'm doing is not right. And
Right.
sometimes it could be the work or it could be the business or the leadership, and sometimes
Yeah.
that does impact. But a lot of the times too, I realize it's also me trying to push myself to a place I do want to be in my life, but not realizing that if I take my own time with it, even if
Mhm.
it's not on the original timeline that I always anticipated my life to be, that's totally okay. And
Yes.
and as a part of that, I kind of wish, on a side note, I wish I had waited on college. And I know that some people are afraid to say that, but if I did have to say one big, huge thing, is that if you don't know what you want to do going into college, don't stress yourself out by going. Or if you at least want some college experience, there's nothing wrong with going to a community college and doing some classes while you're working or while you're doing a side business and trying to
Mhm.
figure that out. Because again, I wanted my degree so badly and I wanted to get out into the world so badly that I also think I didn't take the time to appreciate the resources that I had by going to a university. And the fact that, I wanted to get a job, have a paycheck, get my own place, and, get again on that timeline. I really put myself at a disadvantage by not allowing myself to enjoy college in terms of the education and learning experience as much as I
Mhm.
wanted to. And, I switched my major halfway through. And you change your mind so much at that kind of an age that, it's important to encourage kids that if they don't understand what they want to do, that that's also okay. You know,
Right.
don't put yourself in debt, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt because people are telling you that you need a degree. A degree can be important and it has gotten me places. But I also feel like if I waited a little bit, it might have worked for me even better, or I could have gotten an even better head start because I
Mhm.
had the mindset that I wanted. You know,
Exactly.
yeah, one quote that I love from a show called Daria, if people haven't seen it, they should.
Mhm.
One thing that she says is that she's at some sort of a fair for school and they ask her, what do you want to do when you're older? And she's like, I don't know. And they're like, well, you must want to do something. And she had said that what I hope for is that I don't wake up in my 40s with the bitter realization that I wasted my life in a job that I was forced to choose in my teens. And I
Mhm.
feel like that's
Yes.
something that we're all pressured to do because they want us to see us be successful, and that's understandable. But, for younger generation, especially that, online learning and online education and entrepreneurship is a lot easier than it used to be, and there's more avenues to go with.
Yes.
It's important to understand that, yeah, college can be important, but it is one avenue to where you want to be. And if you want that to go down there later in life, you can, but just don't jump into it because all your other friends are doing that right after high
Mhm.
school.
Exactly. And because, society or maybe family pressures are telling you that this is what you have to do to be successful. I love that you brought this to the table because, like with anything in life, there's no right way to do it. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean that it's right. And college might not be right for you at a time where it's right for everyone else. And I absolutely relate to what you're saying. And I think so many people do. Like, so I was a swimmer in college. And so when I reflect back on my experience, like I went to school to swim really, and education was there and was important, but it was also kind of secondary. It's like, I'm extroverted. I love like the marketing and business world. So like, sure, that's what I'll study. But I graduated and I wasn't like, oh, I'm so excited to go start my career. I was more so like, oh my gosh, now like I'm done swimming. That was my identity. What do I do now? Like you're telling me I'm supposed to go get a corporate job. And it was like a year and a half, 2 years into my corporate job where I, like you, really adapted to the role that everyone thought that I should be. Put together, just the part, didn't give my opinion when I wanted to give my opinion, just like basically closed my mouth and learned and did what everyone told me to do. And like I worked to the point that I was successful in a short period of time. But then I was like, who am I? Like, this isn't me. And just because everyone else is telling me, good job, or, you're doing so well in corporate and blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, is this really me and who I am? And what do I want to do? I felt myself going down that path where I feared waking up 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line and just wondering, what am I doing? And is this making me happy? And is this really what I'm supposed to do in life? And that's really where, I had the fortunate privilege to kind of explore different opportunities too, which I think is important to mention too. Like sometimes we have to do things that we don't like doing to afford to be able to explore what else might be better for us, like a career transition, holding on college, whatever it might be. So, of course, keeping that in mind. But I so relate to your experience. And it's great to meet other women like you and hear your stories because then others who are watching who might be in the situation that you were in of not only navigating that toxic femininity, but navigating like feeling burnt out in your career and knowing that there's something else for you. Hopefully now they can feel empowered to take that leap and that transition to do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that experience, it taught me about burnout and
Yeah.
stress. And I was in a really, really bad mental health space for almost a year and a half. And
Wow.
even now, it's still overcoming certain things and really finally settling into myself.
Hmm.
And, for the sake of success, as important as it might be, your mental health should always come first. It should never be
Absolutely.
what you put on the back burner to get through something. And if you are,
Absolutely.
yeah, and if you're struggling, it's okay to ask for help. I
Mhm.
know 100% how hard that can be. But again, talking to women like you and hearing other stories, it shows that there are more women that are going through this, and that
Mhm.
it's okay to not be so driven all the time that you're
Yeah.
wearing yourself out. And to that end, you might be putting in all the work, but if you're dead tired and you're stressed and you're pulling your own hair out, you're actually hindering how much farther you could be going
Yes.
because you're not taking care of yourself.
Exactly. There's so much conversation around the hustle and how the hustle is so important. But of course, by all means, you can hustle, but you're only, as you said, going to slow yourself down if you are being burnt out and you're not taking care of yourself. How can you expect to realistically reach your goals and be of service to other people in your community and all of that?
Yeah.
So I 100% agree with that. Alyna, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us today. This conversation was seriously such a pleasure, and I'm so looking forward to sharing it with the rest of our world and our community. And if you'd like to get to know Alyna in person or connect with her, you can reach out to her on Instagram, which will be below. You can also attend our event where she'll be speaking, where you can network and learn more from her. Where she'll also, in that conversation, will be sharing more about her experience with navigating mental health, asking for help, and also importantly, how we can use different resources like cannabis and CBD to help us in a healthy way and break down some of those barriers. So, Alyna, thank you so much again. Please feel free to reach out to her. Is there anything else, Alyna, that you'd like to share with our community?
Um, just a big thank you for this. This was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun.
I'm really excited. Definitely, you mentioned how we got connected through Takesha.
Huh.
The next issue of her magazine's coming out tomorrow.
Huh.
I I have some pieces in there that I was lucky enough to be able to write for. I write for several other blogs, so if there's anything that anybody would like to ask me, or you know more people that they would like to connect with and ask about being an entrepreneur, or just even what the cannabis industry is in general, I'm happy to answer anything.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alyna. We'll be sure to put the link to Canna Curious in the magazine below too, so you can check it out.